Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Maximizing Your ROI on Reformulation. I'm Mark Crowell, founder of CNX, and I'm thrilled to be joined by three experts today who live and breathe science and the business of food reformulation. So today we'll explore how to make reformulation pay off for you. And there's a lot of ground to cover. I'd like to break this down into four areas: identifying inefficiencies, optimizing ingredients, balancing the challenges of clean label formulation and nutritional concerns, and last, turning reformulation into an engine for innovation and growth. And that last part might be the most important. Reformulation done right is broader than simply going after cost savings. And today to talk about that are our three panelists. Amy Uzak is head of R&D at JPG Resources, boasting more than 25 years of experience in the R&D space. She specializes in strategic innovation and helps guide teams that take products from early development all the way through to commercialization and beyond. Brittany Kachakovich leads the team at CNX, where she's been for the last 6 years in both R&D and business development account leadership roles after stints at ConAgra and Treehouse Foods. In 2025, she assumed the role of managing director following CNX's acquisition by JPG Resources. She's a food scientist and holds an MBA from Creighton University. And Tanya Lofgren is the business development manager at Suranda, where she helps purpose-driven brands create value through sustainable ingredient solutions. With more than 20 years of experience spanning marketing, product management, and innovation, she brings a creative yet grounded approach to strategy and growth. All right, to get us kicked off, we'd love to do a poll with you, the audience, today. And let's talk about what's driving your reformulation priorities. Philip, can you put the poll up, please? Your answers here help us direct the conversation, and I'll be very curious to see what is driving your reformulation needs now. Cost reduction, that's the one that I think might lead the pack, but lately supply chain challenges and tariffs might give it a good run for its money. Let's see how the results come out. All right, look at that. There is a bit of a surprise here. What do you think, Amy? Is this what you expected to see?
We were just talking about this, Mark. I think with the regulatory environment, specifically around the removal of synthetic colors, we're seeing a lot in this area right now.
Yeah, led by clean label consumer
Mhm.
demand. And wow, you guys are in the right place. We've got a lot of clean label expertise here on the call today. And then followed by regulatory and company specific issues. And then actually a pretty strong third place, supply chain and tariffs. Very interesting. All right, well, let's get to the conversation then. And identifying inefficiencies and cost drivers. I mean, right up front, let's start with the foundation of reformulation and getting a good ROI, identifying those inefficiencies that quietly drive up costs before the reformulation game even gets started. So, Amy, Tanya, you were both at Global Supply Side in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. How was the show? And then it is a lot about ingredients, although traditionally I understand a lot of supplement ingredients there. But what about food ingredients? What did you see? Anything interesting? Anything excite you? Any themes?
I think sort of as we were just talking about a lot in the space of color, there were a lot of discussions, classes, tours that you could attend. They had a walkthrough where they would just lead you from color supplier to sort of give you the highlights. So I did sort of feel like the regulatory environment was driving a bit of information in that space. And so there were lots of great discussions. I think there's both a general approach to how people are doing color, and then very specific supplier by supplier on sort of how they're taking care of each color. So a lot going on in that space and a lot to learn and understand how we're going to be able to use those ingredients to replace the traditionally synthetic ingredients.
Lots of challenges there. And Philip, a couple of months ago, we did a webinar on color. And I guess if any of you in the audience are interested in getting a copy of that, just contact us after this webinar. I'd be happy to send you a link to that recording. Brittany, you're at CNX every day working with the development team on client projects. How does teamwork with suppliers and your internal sourcing person that you work with at the company help you identify unnecessary complexities or costs that don't need to be there in formulations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is the earlier you can start to have those conversations, the better. Our R&D team likes to really bring in that commercialization lens, the procurement lens, supply chain, into the conversation as early as possible, even in the concepting phase, so that you are aware of where some supply shortages might be, some hardships with ingredients, and can make the smartest choices for your product as it's being formed, hand in hand with your cross-functional team.
So this is for all of you, I guess, as we're thinking about reducing that complexity, really getting into the sourcing questions before we even dive into, any bench work or any other kind of reformulation activity. What's your perspective on the tools and data that can help you sort of get a handle on potential ROI for a reformulation project?
I can jump in there and kind of also connect it to Brittany's question because I think as an ingredient supplier, I loved everything you were saying about getting some of that information up front because we're always trying to understand, similar to the poll result in the beginning, just like what are your primary project goals? Is this a cost reduction project? Is this a calorie reduction project? Just like what story are you trying to tell on the shelf? What claims and certifications are you trying to achieve? Like, does this need to be certified organic? Are you trying to achieve some type of a high fiber claim? Processing conditions, timeline, all of that stuff really helps us being able to like recommend an ingredient solution so that we don't waste time going down a path that's not going to fit with your project needs. And in some of those tools, unfortunately, there isn't usually like that single magic tool, but I think it oftentimes is tied into just finding different data sources and then layering them together to kind of build that data story. So for CPG brands, there are tools like Innova and Spins and IRI that we're all familiar with that can help kind of with category analysis, looking at competitive claims, pricing, shelf velocity, all of that. So those tools aren't always affordable for some of the smaller brands. So I would just recommend too leaning into your co-manufacturers, your suppliers. A lot of those partners are monitoring categories and stuff in the same way that you are and might be able to help give you some insights, even if you're not able to afford those big data tools.
So, in terms of identifying inefficiencies and cost drivers, as you sit down to start to plan a reformulation, I'm hearing get your ingredient folks involved early and be clear about what your goals are and what problem are you trying to solve. A little bit of design thinking there. What is the problem you're trying to solve for, and what is the root cause of it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about ingredients and process optimization. Obviously, that's a big deal when you're sitting down to reformulate, choosing those ingredients, making sure you're optimizing the production process so it's efficient. And that's going to lead to cost savings as well, whether you have your own plant or you're working with a co-man. So tell me about smarter ingredient choices and process simplification. Amy, from your perspective, from the R&D side of things, how do you look at that and how do you sort of hit the sweet spot?
Yeah, I think it's always sort of like you're saying, it's a sweet spot. So it's a combination. sort of, I tell people all the time, like, there's never a perfect pathway or the perfect ingredient that's going to solve your problem. So it's a combination of ingredient, formulation, packaging, process. And so the more that you know, so the more details you have, and so sort of where you stand today, the better off you're going to be. But I also think making sure that you've developed a product to align with your consumer guardrails. So sometimes you're overcomplicating things. So you're putting in a certification or a macro target that is stricter than maybe it needs to be. So make sure that when you're looking at reformulating, that you're also looking at the product and the guardrails, because you may have built-in costs that could easily be removed and still satisfy the customer. So that's always something I try to make sure people are keeping in mind.
I think just to build on that too, Amy, not only the customer satisfaction, but also the consumer satisfaction. And maybe this speaks to the data points, Mark, that you mentioned above. But if there was, already studies done and you had a really close in understanding of what those key attributes were for consumers that you couldn't change in the product with a reformulation, like texture or claim, for example, then that would really allow you to pinpoint where you were allowed to make those formula and or process updates.
There's an element there too of what's the brand stand for, isn't there, Brittany?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Tanya, they're multifunctional ingredients and you sell a lot of them. And, to reduce SKUs and processing steps, things like emulsifiers that stabilize multiple systems, functional sweeteners. So talk to me a little bit about some of the go-to ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned emulsifiers. They're definitely a workhorse as far as just being able to improve the dispersion of ingredients throughout different formulations, aiding freeze thaw and kind of can help with dough conditioning or shelf life, a lot of that. So emulsifiers are great. Inulin is another one that I think with kind of the current GLP-1 trends of enhanced protein and fiber ingredients that we're seeing more usage of, because I think not only it can help with like a fiber claim, but it also has like a subtle sweetness. So you may be able to like reduce some of the sweeteners in your formula. Obviously, we know about pre-blends and those types of things for reducing SKUs and processing steps, especially for like more micro ingredients. You just have to be careful with how many pre-blends you're trying to add into your formula, because obviously that can inhibit just processing flexibility. And if you have multiple products within your portfolio that are using some of the same ingredients, if the ratios aren't identical, you might have trouble using those same pre-blends.
Do you offer pre-blends as sort of a custom service?
Not today. I mean, we do get some requests now and then for more like, I would say on the sweetener side, more of some of the sweetener blends with some of the syrups, but we aren't doing any pre-blending today.
Okay, so that would be something that, you go outside to other suppliers for, but that's an interesting thought. So you mentioned fibers. I just want to focus in on this in GLP-1 because we did a seminar on GLP-1 last month. And what are you seeing you mentioned inulin, which obviously has a little bit of sweetness you mentioned. Can you talk about DE and fiber in inulin and what the relationship there is?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about the DE, we're often using a lot of our syrups and the different viscosity. So with the inulin, it's a source of prebiotic fiber. We all know the different key types of inulin out there. Like we're dealing with a lot of chicory, and ours happens to be from agave. So it has a subtle sweetness. It's not super sweet, but it all is kind of like depending on what you're trying to achieve in your formulation.
Amy, when a client approaches you with a cost reduction target and there's a reformulation involved, how do you decide whether to focus on the ingredient side or on the processing side or to put them together?
I think, yeah, it's always easy if it's just one of them, but often it's sort of all of them. So the more details that we can gather on sort of where the costs are coming from, the better we are at sort of assessing the situation. So what ingredients are contributing how much to the overall cost, How important is that ingredient? Sometimes the cost is coming from an ingredient that sort of startles you. And so that's an easy, like, sort of thought provoker. And is there a way that I could replace this or change the amount of this? I think from a process standpoint, it's great to understand if they've got all the way down to the level of yield loss and those types of things that can help you sort of understand the efficiencies of the product. I think package is also a great place to understand sort of like what's your cost per unit and then what's your packaging for that as well. So taking a look at the whole picture often gives you the clearest picture because I think a lot of people immediately go to formula, and sometimes you can make changes without ever touching the formula, and just improve the process along the way or make small changes in packaging. And all of those have implications, whether it's throughputs or capital or whatever, but you want to look at sort of what the ROI is immediately and then over a set period of time.
All right, last question in this section. This is really for all of you, and it's a bit of a loaded question. So I'm interested, Amy, Brittany, from a development perspective, Tanya, from an ingredient perspective. Two-part question. So one, how important is the quality of technical support that you guys get from your ingredient partners? Tanya, you'll just have to listen to this one. And then number two, what's your expectation for turnaround time on receiving samples? And what are you finding with your suppliers, particularly with supply chain being what it is today? And then Tanya, I'd love to get your perspective from the supplier side, getting these requests and what you think is reasonable.
Well, I can
Amy, Brittany?
start. I'll start with that one. I think my advice and something that our team, our R&D team really tries to do is just given how critical the relationships are with your ingredient suppliers to try and foster both like a sales relationship with that lead and then also a technical relationship with that lead because it's very important. It's also great to ask for general education from your ingredient suppliers. They're always innovating and they also have a wealth of knowledge of how that system, how that ingredient functions in a whole variety of applications. So asking for some of that background education can really help to open up the conversation, perhaps create some new unlocks that your team and the supplier team haven't been seeing before. So that's always a good conversation to have. It also helps to the question of speed. It helps to quicken the speed to market because if you're able to have more of these discussions up front, you maybe can identify what the correct samples are and the correct application rate is sooner with that upfront support, so that it creates less iteration loops and helps you with that speed to market.
Yeah, I'll just build on that, Brittany. I agree. We can't be experts at every ingredient, but our suppliers can be. So I think reaching out to them and really, gaining their knowledge is amazing. And I think, we're sort of learning this from AI, but sort of like the prompts that you give them reflects the information that you get back, and sort of building on what Tanya said, the more specific information you can give them, some of the processing temperatures that they might see, like, is it for cost reduction? Is it for a certain claim? Like, the more information that you can give them, the better the information that you have that can come back, and it can really narrow down sort of like, instead of looking at 500 ingredients, now I'm looking at 5 ingredients. And so I think that, that really helps as well.
Sparks a thought that we love to get a project brief from clients. It almost sounds, Amy, like you would give like a project brief to ingredient suppliers at some sort of, short version of that to kind of get them up to speed quickly. Would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yes, say the exact same thing to clients. Like, the more information you can give me, like, the more focused we can become. So same thing on the outbound.
Tanya, you've heard a lot of nice things from Brittany and Amy about suppliers and partnerships. What is it really like day to day?
Oh boy. Yes, people are really quick to request just sample requests. And it's like, you don't know anything about the project. It's like, if you could just give me a little bit more, like, is it for a bar? Is it for because then we can help again, make those recommendations. What are those certifications, everything we've talked about. The project brief that you're outlining would be like an absolute dream. And I love everything Brittany and Amy said about just like supplier trainings, because that's really important. We've actually been doing a lot of like sweeteners 101 or fats and oils 101 for some of our key customers to, again, just give them a general overview of like the category and maybe some of the ingredients that are available in there, and then where our ingredients fit in. And comparisons are just really valuable, I think, when you look at some of that. And I would expand not only on just like technical support, but I think the support overall, holistically, that supplier can give, not only talking about the technical, and the level of technical can vary. If you're just talking about a chocolate chip inclusion, it might be very different than what you're hoping to receive from like a new and novel sweetener with starting percentages and some of that. But really that overall support of, you get a sample, if it works in your formula, do you know, like, lead time, supply chain risks? Like, is this ingredient something that's produced year round, or is it produced once a year on a harvest campaign? So that when you go to get to the end of your project, you're not surprised by, oh, it's not available, we already sold out, that campaign year. So again, just the more questions you can ask, but lean into your suppliers for sure for support.
Amy, you mentioned AI briefly. I'm curious, what impact is that having on reformulation?
I think AI is a great tool. It's not going to reformulate necessarily for you, but putting those prompts, specific prompts in, can definitely help get you sort of maybe through a first phase. And I think it's always sort of going back to it as well. So like this is, don't put it in once at the kickoff a question and then turn away from it. I think the more people are learning how to use it, and going back to it, the more you're learning. And it's all about like garbage in, garbage out. So giving it the right information to get what you need, but also doing so in a very secure, in a secure way.
You've got that enterprise account so that your information doesn't go out. It doesn't become part of the training or, run afoul of any NDAs that you might have with clients. I think that's a really important point that I've heard clients concerned about it. Where's, how are you using AI? Where's that information going? So I think that's consultants particularly need to reassure clients that information is not going anywhere. Tanya, from your side, AI, any thoughts or learnings that you've had?
We're really interested in looking at how that's maybe speeding up kind of some of the product development cycle, like you're saying, Amy. I'm curious if you're on the development side more leaning into like a chat GPT, or if you've explored some of these other AI tools that you're able to plug in some basic ingredients that you want to use or the type and have it kick out actual recipes and connect you right to suppliers. I'd love to hear about your experience just with that advanced prototyping in AI.
So we do, I think the sort of general tool that a lot of the people have is sort of the enterprise version of ChatGPT, but we do have some AI specialists that are really digging in around all of the different areas, whether it's strategically or through R&D or, through different phases of a project, and really kind of it's changing. So the landscape is changing so much every day that it's, sort of in like that early sort of crazy phase, I think, when you think about AI. So I think we really have certain people sort of focusing generally and some people focusing very specifically on the different tools that are out there, that are giving recommendations to people.
I think
Yeah, I think it could. Oh, go ahead, Brittany.
just to add on to what Amy was saying, one of the areas that I found that was interesting that the team is using for AI currently is really just to gather an outside perspective. So maybe you're not relying on the output from the system, but it allows you to maybe see a system like a process or batching or operations, something about, the way that you're planning for labor for these products in a new way that could perhaps be innovative, or allow for some cost savings as well for your team.
And sometimes I think it's just validation, like
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you've got a good understanding of the approach and you've done a little bit of work and you put it into AI to see if you've like missed something or that it's concurring what you're already doing. So it's just another sort of reference as well.
That's a great way to keep on top of kind of just the trends that you're seeing and things in certain categories with prompts to, again, just kind of steer that innovation or reformulation in a specific direction that's aligned with what consumers are looking for.
I love that idea of asking the AI, here's a well formulated question or set of, uh, data or information about a particular product. What did I miss? And just seeing what it comes back with. I mean, I think it's a great way to use AI. I'm constantly surprised by what the answers are that come back. It's like, oh, wow, I did not think of that. That's a great point. So we're at about the midway point. Let's do another survey, another poll. And we've covered formula inefficiencies, optimizing. Do you go to ingredient or go to process? Let's see where you're hitting the most friction on your reformulation ROI journey. So, what's the biggest barrier for you right now maximizing ROI in your reformulations? Philip's going to put up a poll for us. We'd love to get your thoughts specifically, just one choice here. Where's your biggest pain point? Which one of these kind of hits it? And if it's other, Phil, see if you can. I don't know if we have the ability to make a note there, but love to get your thoughts here and get the panel's take on what you guys are really wrestling with when it comes to maximizing your ROI. Give it just another moment here. Tanya, what do you think's going to be the winner here as the most painful?
Maybe ingredient functionality. I think we hear a lot about that just as people are trying to find alternate sources or change formulas or maybe clean up the label, like we're talking about, that maybe it doesn't perform the same as something that an ingredient that might be conventional or chemically produced.
Well, we heard that in the color webinar, just the difficulty of getting natural colors to perform. Well, what do we have? What do you think of that, Brittany?
The tie for first, it looks like supply
Yeah.
chain and then quantifying ROI are the two barriers.
Well, we should get into that a little bit because I think quantifying ROI is probably a little bit outside of the expertise of R&D people typically. So, how do you do that? And who does it in your organization? So let's dig into the next section, which is balancing clean label, nutrition, and cost. So, I mean, look, we're all in the business of doing clean label products and making sure the nutritional requirements are taken care of as well as taste and everything else. But I think it's top priority for everybody these days. I don't know anybody that's saying they make me a dirty label product, but they often conflict with cost targets. And so how do you find the balance, Brittany, between that clean label development and hitting a cost target or getting cost savings on a reformulation?
Yeah, it's absolutely the biggest, question up front in a lot of projects. I think one of the things that really helps a team to answer that is allowing enough time to explore. There's a whole variety of ingredients. We've talked about processing and packaging solutions. So being open to different forms that the solution can come in is important, but then also allowing your team time to really test that. And I would say test it at different scales too, because even if your solution appears like it should work on a commercialization stage, it's always better to pilot test and then have a full size batch test of that as well to really verify some of those wins. Our team always likes to lead with the gold standard, the culinary approach, making sure that taste and flavor are first. And so those are some things that you're not willing to compromise on when you're doing the development, but you do have to balance, right? What are you trying to achieve nutritionally and financially with that?
Goes back to the earlier statement about just really knowing what your goals are, and then within that, knowing what your priorities are. And I think that is so important and can just save a lot of time and heartache in the reformulation process, can't it? Tanya, from your perspective, you are a specialist in clean label ingredients. and more expensive is probably something you hear all the time, or even maybe less efficient. So how do you deal with that?
I think, efficiency first, addressing that one. Some of those misconceptions may be true. Like with an example, we just talked a moment ago about starches. I mean, chemically modified starches were designed for increasing process efficiency, and chemical modification isn't allowed if you're trying to do something like an organic label. So that leaves you with native starches, but there's also, pre-gelatinized, physically modified starches that I personally feel like are greatly underused in clean label. And I think there are more iterations and more ingredients coming forth all the time with that. So I think just staying on top of like what are the new innovations and kind of clean label ingredients is really helpful. Cost, I think that can depend on so many different properties that you're looking, like we said about the certifications, or if like your brand is, top 8 allergen free and you want to get allergen testing, to secure the brand, all these claims and certifications that you're trying to like stack on to an ingredient can definitely add to cost. So Brittany mentioned earlier about, are you just overcomplicating it? Like what is kind of that
Right.
base level that you need to achieve? I think back to a product development person that I talked to a couple of years ago who said, yep, everybody comes in and they want to make a protein bar, but they want organic grass-fed whey and, all this. But then it's like you have to understand at some point where you're willing to make some of those trade-offs. So having that in mind, I think can be really helpful. But when we lean into kind of ingredient suppliers again, we're often trying to help them by providing like a good, better, best scenario so that they can make those choices based on their priorities.
And then I guess, Amy, sometimes you got to do some experimentation to see, good, better, best. How does it actually perform in formulation? So that means some benchtop time, doesn't it?
It does, and I had written down sort of the same note to myself. Sort of, I think sometimes you can tell them good, better, best, but I think showing them is really helpful in helping them make decisions. It's hard to make trade-offs, especially if you feel like it's going against something or changing some maybe like your original thought. But if you can show them the difference, if we could just use this one ingredient, or if you were willing to go up 1 gram on sugar, or if you were willing to, make one change, like this is the difference between the product, at $1 and 90 cents, and these are the different ways that we can get there, and showing them the options as you walk them through it really can help kind of solidify it versus just saying like, hey, this is what you need to do. So I think that that's
Sometimes a
also,
little show and tell is, yeah, the
yeah,
picture's
it
worth
is.
the actual ingredient in
Right.
hand is worth 1,000 words, right?
Exactly. The ingredient in hand, the sample in hand, so they can sort of taste it and, see it. I know that we often show prototypes as part of our process, and I like to tell the people that for the 3 products you got, there were like, 30 that made it into the trash can, as we worked our way through the process. And so showing them sort of the options that we've come down, sort of those best possible options, good, better, best.
Beyond
Anya,
just oh, I was just going to say beyond the ingredient functionality too, some of that good, better, best can include certifications or supply chains, or knowing like if your consumer is averse to GMOs or something like that. Well, there can be GMO free corn, but hey, if you want a little bit more assurance, maybe like rice or tapioca products where conventional genetic modification doesn't exist. Even within the supply chain, I think there are other considerations for good, better, best.
Right.
Anya, are there examples that you can come up with where clean label options are actually save money for people?
Well, I mean, clean label, we all know that's not like a regulated term, but it's veering into this kind of simpler, fewer ingredients. So I think just right off the bat, using fewer ingredients that might be higher quality might just be able to save you money right away. And I also like to look at just the low hanging fruit. knowing again your agricultural sources. Something like if you're trying to kind of get some words on your package, an example like organic coconut oil, you may not pay much more than a conventional coconut oil because that agricultural source is just easier to grow and doesn't require a lot of inputs. So what does that value of that word organic mean on your product, even in the ingredient statement, if you're trying to appeal to clean label brands? So there are some low hanging items like that too that might help you just improve the perception of the label. That might not be a huge cost trade off.
Just makes me think, listening to all of you, that getting the full story, ingredients, processing, marketplace positioning, labeling, nutrition. I mean, it's complicated. Reformulation has a lot of different facets. And, we don't always get the full story, right? And then we're not always expert in all of those things, category analysis. So it really takes a team to put together the whole picture so that even before you sit down to begin the reformulation process, you need to have all of your facts and your briefs lined out. Doesn't always happen that way, does it? So, Amy, you spent 15 years at Post, very large company. Brittany, 6 years between ConAgra and Treehouse Foods. Tanya, you've been around a long time. So, working in larger organizations where you do have teams, how do you do that communication? How does that cross-functional synergy work? What's your experience been?
Just as today we're working with clients, I think working cross-functionally for a big company is similar. I think, beginning with the end in mind, like what does success look like is super important. I spent years in sort of cost reduction, and in many ways, although not as glamorous as innovation, there's there's a lot of science that goes into it because you're trying to get to the same product and not the same manner. So I think there is some critical thinking that goes in there. But I also think like understanding, am I trying to get to the exact same product, or am I trying to get to parity? Or is there a chance, and I know this is going to come up, that I can improve the product in some way to get it. So I think, understanding that as much, you can get 80% of the way there for a small return on investment, but that last 20% to get it to exactly the same can sometimes take years. So like how important is that? How well established is that brand? Am I trying to, change an iconic food to reduce costs where I need to get, probably as close as I can? Or is it like a newer product on the market where if it was maybe a little bit different or better, it would be, just as good. So I think understanding all of that is super important when you're looking at sort of cost optimization.
I love your, begin with the end in mind, be really clear about your goals. And that applies to ROI, right? ROI, return on investment. That's a financial measurement. Do you have financial measurements for reformulation
Well,
projects?
I think it depends on the reason for the reformulation. So I just want to ground us also in one of the poll results that one of the top
Yeah,
priorities is supply chain variability,
yeah.
and that can be sometimes a surprise for organizations. So you might have less resources, at the front end of really why you're reformulating, maybe a little bit less knowledge of the supply chain, but there's this need, either consumer-based or market-based, to reformulate. So you're going to have this cross-functional effort to make sure that you're learning about the markets, you're understanding who's innovating in that space, you're understanding what the considerations are for pricing, for availability, in order to make the smart decisions around supply chain.
Well said. Well said. Well, let's go on to that fourth section we talked about at the top of the show: innovation, partnerships, and really achieving that long-term ROI. How does reformulation become an innovation engine? Those two things, less sexy was mentioned, than new product, new to the world development, but There can be real innovation and strategic advantage to reformulation. How does that work? Amy, that's a practical question. What do you look at?
Right. I think people hear the word, cost reduction or better return on investment, and they immediately think you're going to take something out of my product that I really want, or you're going to like just run it faster and it's just going to not be as high quality. But I think that you can really look at it, and lots of times, the cost in one area can benefit you in, another way. So I think it's really looking, sort of like we've been saying the whole time, like holistically at the entire sort of approach to the project, and how can I get, and maybe like it's a claim, and so like the cost of the product hasn't changed that much, but I'm now appealing to a customer, and so like I'm gonna, sell more product. So I think it's really looking at everything that's going on in there. Or I've been able to eliminate something that was, wouldn't let me get into Whole Foods and now I can. Or, I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it. So I think really understanding what's driving it, as Brittany said, like, is it to be able to go to a customer that you haven't been able to go to before? Is it to able to market to a consumer that you haven't been able to market to before? And I think also like sometimes it's just like, volumes can drive cost reductions as well. So there's so many different ways to look at, getting that sort of return on investment.
I love that because, my mind goes to cost savings. Of course, we're going to get it from ingredient, we're going to get it from processing. But what you're saying is so true. If your reformulation results in higher volumes, you're selling more product, that can work in multiple ways to give you your ROI, can't it?
Right.
So Brittany, what do you see when you're at the table with clients and suppliers when ingredients are being chosen for a particular formulation? What are the kinds of discussions that you're having, regarding
Yeah.
ROI?
And one of the ones we like to start with is perhaps, before the supplier conversation even, if you're locked in with a manufacturer or a co-manufacturer, we like to always take a look at what ingredients they're purchasing today, right? And maybe this speaks to Amy to the point on volume. If you're able to
Yeah.
combine your ingredient order with something that another brand or that manufacturer is already purchasing, you might really be able to leverage the volume for a lower price. So there's a little bit of that investigation that has to happen, I think, throughout the development process, but certainly early on is helpful.
Yeah. Tanya, you talked earlier about, well, an ingredient might not be available. How do you protect ingredient availability and pricing in such a dynamic environment today?
I mean, key, like we said, is just working with that supplier, understanding the life cycle of the ingredient. It's okay to ask for things like, what has the pricing stability been like on this ingredient over the last few years? Like they have historical data that they can help. Are there watch outs as far as like the geography where this ingredient is grown or things that could impact like longer term, supply chain for this ingredient? All that stuff is really important to know. But in the end, I think really contracts and agreements are your best safeguard as far as protection because, we can't just stock every ingredient. Like we too, as an ingredient supplier, are always trying to tie up that supply and demand and make sure that we have enough for customers and most ingredient companies, right? They're tending to prioritize those customers for the stock that they have with contracts and with agreements in place. If you're really focused on just trying to spot buy ingredients, if your product takes off, I think those can be harder to secure for long term.
This is where I think working with a procurement specialist, if you're in a larger company, can really help. And Brittany, you have a procurement specialist, and Amy, you do too, that you can call on. What if you don't have that person? It really becomes kind of critical, Tanya, to lean on your suppliers and ask the questions, right? And you kind of have to put that procurement hat on as an R&D person, don't you?
Yes. Well, and I think that's working with reputable suppliers, right? It's like if you just ask the questions, a lot of time there's so much knowledge and information there but it's how to share it in a way with all different types of customers working in different applications. So again, if you can be more specific about, we're trying to launch something in 6 months. These are some ingredients that we're thinking about. Most ingredient suppliers are happy to just train and kind of alert you to some of the risks or watch outs with these ingredients.
Really separates your supplier base, the ones that do have those resources, do have that expertise, do want to spend the time training. I imagine not every supplier
Right.
is able to do that the way that you can at Surrenda. So that's a good point. Anybody have, from a development standpoint, sort of a customer success story with reformulation that you want to share? I always think it's great to hear about successes and hear stories.
I think one of the things that, makes our clients most successful when it comes to reformulation or supply chain issues is having options. And so that's always one of the things that we look at, whether it's manufacturing options or ingredient options. It could be a new ingredient, like within the same family of ingredients from the same supplier, or perhaps it's an alternative supplier that you can go to. I think having a well thought out plan for manufacturing, in different circumstances is something that our team does and that sets our clients up for the best success.
That's great. Amy, any success stories that you can share without giving away client names?
I think, sort of what I mentioned earlier about sort of understanding their guardrails so that they're not overcomplicating. There have been times that we've been able to sort of reformulate and keep the product, you know, very much in line with what the consumer needs and be able to get rid of a higher expensive ingredient that probably wasn't driving any advantage to them, and been able to quickly turn on something like that. So I think that really understanding like what the key drivers are for the sort of end consumer has been an area that we've seen that.
That's been a reoccurring theme during our discussion today. I think it's a perfect place to enter into our lightning round, our last question for each of you. But I mean, really brings up the point again that the ultimate ROI is both a cost savings and a change that drives more volume and profit. So I think, if you can get that twofer, it's really a grand slam for a reformulation. So, all right, into the lightning round. One key takeaway from each of you, to Amy, to you first. If a brand is just beginning to evaluate a reformulation, for cost savings, what's the first step in the process?
I think the first thing that they need to do is get like sort of a detailed sort of COGS or BOM analysis so that they know what's driving cost. You don't want to start reformulating without really having insight to where the biggest costs are. Like I said, lots of times people want to go to formula and you can look at that, and be like, wait a minute, that's not the biggest driver. It's like this crazy yield loss that we're getting. Like there's a way that we could just optimize that step and not change the formula at
And
all.
that starts you off on your journey with wherever you're going to go from there, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Brittany, from a commercialization lens, what's the biggest mistake teams make during reformulation as it relates to commercialization?
I think this also has come up a couple times in the conversation today, but I think just being very clear on what it is you're trying to achieve, the objective of the commercialization test or trial, and really the requirements, whether that's for customers or consumers, having those non-negotiables that you really hold strong to throughout the development and the commercialization process.
Sage advice. And Tanya, to you from the supplier side, what's one underutilized opportunity to improve ROI that you see frequently?
I mean, hopefully we've hit on it enough in here, but it is getting close with your supplier and treating them like any other critical business partner. Because I think there's a lot of knowledge that can be shared that can save you after you've already developed the product and you love it, only to find out that, oh, there's a hiccup in the supply chain or the ingredients aren't available. That can hinder success.
Well, listen, great session, everyone. I think you've really hit it right square on the head. audit your product for complexity, validate early with consumers, look at what's happening with competitors in the marketplace, collaborate. Cross-functional teams obviously are critical here. You've really got a lot of different expertise that has to come to the table for a successful reformulation, and that's how you maximize ROI. So let's do our final poll before we sign off. We've got a few minutes. We're running a little bit ahead of schedules, which is great. We're happy to take any questions that you might have in the audience. But one final poll. Please take a minute to give us your feedback before we sign off on what was your overall satisfaction with today's webinar. And if we could do one thing differently for the next webinar, what would it be? And Philip, have we decided on our next webinar yet?
We have not decided. We have a couple different options out there for 2026. This is the last one for the year, as you mentioned, Mark, but we have a couple topics that we are discussing, and that may be a secret poll for our respondents so they could weigh in on what topic
Oh, wow. Okay.
they would like
Yeah.
next.
Love.
In the business, we call that a tease.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm going to put my vote in there. As you know, I've been following the ultra processed foods subject very closely, and the new standards from the non ultra processed foods certification that's coming out from the non-GMO project will be live in January for the first time. And I am really interested in digging in to that subject with a panel. So maybe we will see that one come up in January as a webinar topic. I want to thank Amy, Brittany, Tanya for sharing your expertise today. And I want to thank everyone that joined us. Reformulation is a powerful value creation tool, chance for a brand to reposition via label changes, product performance improvements, manufacturing process simplification, so many different dimensions. Who knew that reformulation was so complex? Well, we hope today's webinar has revealed some of the complexities and opportunities, and everyone will receive a copy of today's webinar, a link to the recording. Please share it and link to us on social media. And if you'd like to reach out to any of us for any further information, Philip's going to put our contact information up there on the screen for us.